At 2:45 a.m. on November 11, 2020, a single crash exposed a problem Cincinnati had been living with for decades. One truck jackknifed and a second truck carrying potassium hydroxide slammed into it, and the collision ignited hundreds of gallons of diesel fuel, causing a fire that burned at 1,500 degrees Celsius. Now, keep in mind, this is happening on arguably the most important highway link in the Midwest, carrying just under $500 billion in freight each year. The bridge was shut down immediately and didn't open for 6 weeks. But this is not just a bridge problem, it's a corridor problem. The Brent Spence is where I-71 and I-75 merge into one and push across the Ohio River. It carries traffic moving between places as far apart as Michigan and Florida, but it also connects directly into Cincinnati, Covington, I-74, I-275, and US 50. Before you even look at what's going on downtown, the flaw is obvious. An enormous amount of national freight, regional commuters, and local trips are all funneled into a single corridor. And zooming in, look at this mess. There are too many conflicting movements jammed into too little space. Drivers are forced to merge, exit, and thread through a compressed decision zone with almost no room to recover when something goes wrong. But the real problem shows up the moment something breaks. In a resilient network, if one link goes down, the system flexes. Traffic spills onto parallel routes that were built to share the load. But this corridor doesn't have that kind of slack. The Brent Spence isn't just a crossing, it's the crossing. When the bridge went dark in 2020, everything shifted onto whatever else the region had. And yes, there were other crossings, just none built to take the punch of an interstate. Interstate 471 over the Big Mac Bridge became the first release valve, almost overnight turning into the unofficial alternate. Farther out, I-275 took the overflow, sending drivers on wide arcs east or west before they could bend back towards Cincinnati or northern Kentucky. The smaller local bridges were never meant for this kind of load, and some couldn't even take trucks because of strict weight limits. The issue is that the system has no real redundancy. Nothing else could swallow the 160,000 vehicles, including 30,000 trucks, that normally funnel across the Brent Spence every day. Daily crossings are projected to push toward 233,000 by 2035. And because I have to mention it, when the bridge originally opened in 1963, it was only designed for 80,000. So the problem isn't just that the network lacks a backup, it's that the one bridge carrying the region's most important flow is doing double the work it was built for, with even more on the way. This whole realization is why the states went back to the drawing board. The project had been studied for years, but the modern version really took shape after Ohio and Kentucky secured over $1.6 billion in federal grants in December of 2022, which finally gave them the funding to move forward on a project originally estimated at about $3.6 billion, a number that is now significantly higher, but more on that in a minute. The official project limits run for roughly 8 miles, from Dixie Highway in Kentucky to the Western Hills Viaduct area in Ohio. The agencies believed the real failure point was the way the approach system functioned on both sides of the bridge. So the idea is to build a new double-deck companion bridge just west of the existing Brent Spence, but not as a simple copy of what's already there. The new span is a cable-stayed design with independent upper and lower decks, meaning there is no giant steel truss tying both levels together the way you might expect on a more conventional bi-level highway bridge. That gives it a cleaner profile, a wider visual presence, and a smaller footprint. It's also being built with 5 lanes in each direction plus full shoulders, which is a major operational upgrade over the existing bridge. But the defining purpose of this plan is not the cable-stayed bridge itself. It's the choice to split traffic by purpose. The new companion bridge takes all the interstate through traffic, the stuff that never needed to be downtown in the first place. The existing bridge stays open, but it gets reworked into a local-only facility, and the Brent Spence goes from 4 lanes per deck back to 3, with real shoulders restored. This kind of sounds like an obvious reduction, but operationally and paired with the new bridge, it's the opposite. You're removing the chaotic overlap and giving drivers recovery space. You're giving it, as some like to put it, room to breathe. The next piece is the collector-distributor, or CD system. If you've heard that term before, the basic idea is simple. Instead of forcing every local driver to merge directly into the main interstate and then fight back across it for the next exit, you build a parallel set of lanes to handle that churn separately. That matters because one of Brent Spence's biggest problems is the number of conflicting decisions happening in the fastest lanes. Local traffic trying to reach downtown streets, US 50, Fort Washington Way, or neighborhood exits is currently mixed right in with through traffic. The rebuilt corridor is designed to intercept those local movements earlier, keep them on separate paths longer, and reduce the weaving that now makes the whole system so unstable. Then there are the geometry fixes. The plan calls for removing left-hand exits, rebuilding interchange ramps, replacing bridges carrying or crossing I-75, and adding a new exit to improve access to the stadium and museum area. The 2 one-way bridges here are set to be replaced with 1 two-way bridge. All of this reconfiguration work is expected to free up nearly 11 acres for redevelopment or civic space. Yet another example that shows how much of this project is really about cleaning up the road network. But a question hangs over this whole project. Why wouldn't the region put public transit on a once-in-a-generation new bridge? To understand why that didn't happen, or should I say is not going to happen, you have to zoom out and look at what the region already has. On the Ohio side, Cincinnati's transit network is still built around buses, Metro's fixed routes, Access Paratransit, and the newer Metro Now on-demand service. There is rail, technically, but the connector streetcar is a 3.6-mile downtown loop. It doesn't cross the river. On the Kentucky side, the Transit Authority runs the regional bus system, including the South Bank Shuttle, which does cross the river and links directly into Cincinnati. So when you look at the map, the region already has cross-river transit. It's just not rail. It's buses running on the same streets and bridges as everyone else. The team says this project's effort is only meant to fix the highway piece of the regional system, not redesign the transit system. Dedicated bus lanes aren't part of the plan, but they argue reliability should still improve because local routes already make more than 200 weekday trips over the Brent Spence. In the new shoulders, they're being built full depth, which means the design wouldn't block future bus-on-shoulder operations if the region ever chooses to go that direction. The same logic shows up with rail. The team says new rail facilities weren't considered feasible here, partly because there are no active regional plans for new rail in the foreseeable future. But this is where the frustration builds. The current design doesn't reserve space for future rail. For a lot of people, that feels like a missed opportunity that won't come back. And that's where the debate splits. One side says the region's transit reality is buses, not rail, and that unclogging the choke points will help those buses immediately. The other side says that if you're already spending over $3 billion to rebuild an 8-mile corridor and add a new river crossing, this is exactly when you lock in dedicated transit capacity. Okay, let's talk about this cost. The project was sitting at $3.6 billion just a few weeks ago. Then came a sudden 22% jump, pushing the estimate to just under $4.4 billion. Officials pin the spike on rising construction material costs, but several sources are already warning that this still isn't the final number. With roughly $1.6 billion covered by federal grants, that leaves around $2.8 billion for Ohio and Kentucky to cover. The public numbers do not give one simple final split of that remainder, but the project materials place the overall shares at roughly $2 billion for Ohio and $1.6 billion for Kentucky, with the two states splitting the bridge itself and each paying for the approach work on its own side. The debates around this project are very real, but the core goal of this project is simple: fix a corridor that has been stretched beyond what it was ever designed to handle. After decades of studies and false starts, Ohio and Kentucky are now moving forward with one of the largest infrastructure projects in the region, backed by rare alignment between both states and leaders from both political parties. If it works the way engineers hope, the result will not just be a new structure on the skyline, but a corridor that finally functions the way it was supposed to. I'm Josh, this is Buildcore. Thanks for watching.